I have almost tackled the issues, not all of them, which I wanted to tackle, issues that the Supreme Court indicated, with one exception, which is what I'll do now, which is the criticism that the UGC regulations are vague, the terms that is, and that there's a lack of clarity. Now, why is it important? What exactly is the message that Supreme Court is giving us the citizens and those concerned with it? So, I want to tackle that issue because, you see, our tendency is, especially when we want to appear very profound, we say, these are all semantic discussions. It's a question of meaning, or we should not fight over words. As an Indian, when Indians talk this way, most of us talk that way in India, there's something extraordinary because, see, India is one culture, not the only, but one culture which placed an enormous emphasis on words having consequences. That does not mean that when you chant a mantra, a Rigvedic or a Samavedic mantra, these mantras have some power and they work. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but in this world, in this day and age, it's a bit difficult to show what that power is. It's not important to us now, but the point is, when these are the things we have grown up with, it teaches us that words have consequences in the world. Therefore, it's very important that you use the right words, which is why grammar developed so in India, one of the first culture which spent thousands of years developing, expanding, improving the speech, what we call vak in Sanskrit. We even have things like vachaspati, that is somebody who is like Bruhaspati. We have vachaspati, so people who have control, not so much control, who are the husbands of speech. We also, and this is not rhetorical, subhashitas, which tell you that, for example, vagbhushanam kiyante khalu bhushanani satatam, vagbhushanam bhushanam. All ornaments decay, disintegrate constantly, but the only thing which does not is vagbhushanam. Does not mean rhetorical flourishes of, we are familiar with politicians coming with speeches to entertain huge crowds, that, or giving rousing speeches in the parliament. That is not what we're talking about. When you say vagbhushanam bhushanam, we're talking about using the right words in the right way with the right meaning. So that we need the Supreme Court to warn us. It's interesting to pause a bit, to think about it, other than us fighting about words and having meaningless semantic discussions. Now, if it's a semantic discussion, it cannot be meaningless because semantic is about meaning, but it's a meaningless semantic discussion. So we don't even know what semantics is, but good. Well, let's just think about it a bit, and I'll illustrate it with a couple of points later on, what it means. Is he speaking using the right words? Disciplines your thought, directs your thought, guides your thought, helps you think. So using right words is an absolute requirement if you want to think at all. Very simple example. For example, if you cannot say, do not know, or use it casually, when a child says 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, there's some idea of addition, whatever the idea is, some way saying about what you do with numbers, and that when you put two numbers, namely 2 and 2 together, you get another number 4. You can't teach a children elementary arithmetic by saying, put in any number you feel like. These are all discussions about numbers. Who is interested? You won't teach the child even elementary arithmetic. Same thing with sciences. Consider teaching, learning physics, biology, genetics, and so on, or medicine. If you say, what is a virus, what is the bacteria, and you say, our discussion about the meaning of the words is a semantic discussion, imagine what medications you're going to give. Even in ordinary conversations, and you want to teach a child and make it distinguish between a plantain and a banana, and an orange, you're teaching that these words not simply have meaning, which is far more important, which I will talk about soon. They refer to objects in the world. They refer to different objects in the world. In other words, the words have references, or there is a referent. Not all words have a referent all the time in the world, but most of the words we use in sciences, in conversations, do refer to things, objects, events, processes in the world. So we have how we use a word, tells us something about the meaning of the word, and something about what the reference is. Why is this? This is what is required when you want to make a law. You see, there is a very fundamental principle, which is a very healthy principle, even to human thinking. It says, law, I won't say it in Latin, law must be certain, law must be clear, law must be concise, and so on. So clarity and certainty are connected to what law does. Obviously, if you do not define very precisely what murder is, what theft is, you can't have your criminal codes. So we have in front of us regulation that the Supreme Court finds vague and unclear. That relates me back to the puzzle I expressed in the first or the second fragment of the video, where I asked myself, how is it possible then that these issues were not formulated when laws like Atrocity Act came into existence? Because these kind of laws are fed by the mountain of ambiguity, lack of clarity, and meaninglessness of things in, about, of atrocity law, in its turn drawing upon the same kind of unclear, imprecise, confusing notions in the Constitution of India. Now my problem is, of course, I can answer it. I don't know the answer. Why is it Supreme Court waits so long to make this extraordinarily important point? about the legislations and about the Constitution. But I won't go into it now, but I will look at UGC things. For example, this, what is it called? Equity regulations, equity rules, or whatever. To begin with, it talks about discrimination. And they say that discrimination could either be explicit or implicit. This is the formulation. Now, pause there a bit. Think about this. See, I suppose that even though UGC is a committee composed of political appointees, that is, those who probably favor, without knowing what they're favoring, of course, they favor the government policies, basically they favor the governments. This is not of the BJP problem, this is also, if it's a problem, and this is also what the Congress have done. Now we can assume, at least I begin with the assumption, that people in the commission are intelligent, capable, and competent. That is, it consists of psychologists, for example, it would consist of pedagogical specialists, for example, educationalists, administrators, and so on. All of them would probably belong to the best in their field. I assume that because I don't know how the current commission is structured. I don't know their Kula, Varna, Jati, I don't know. I don't even know their names. But I'm assuming that when the BJP leadership appointed them, they chose them on the basis of their abilities and competences. And that's the first assumption I make. The second assumption I make is that people who are there not only know their fields and their domains, but they're also intelligent people. It's possible that I'm wrong, but I'm making these two assumptions. Right. And perhaps a third one, I also assume that some of these people have been awarded high civilian awards, like distinctions and titles like Padma Shris, Padma Bhushans, Padma Vibhushans, and so on. May not be Bharata Ratnas. I don't think there's any Bharata Ratna sitting in the commission, but rightly they have been rewarded. Now, these are the assumptions I'm making about University Grants Commission, because remember, it is a university. That is, second, it's about higher education. So people who are sitting there have these abilities, capacities, and competences. Under this assumption, one thing becomes absolutely ununderstandable. Namely, psychologists will tell you, who do research about cognition and perception, whether they are cognitive psychologists or perception psychologists or individual psychology or whatever they teach or study or do research in, or cognitive scientists, and they write about cognition and perception. One thing they all know is that in order to perceive objects, in order to have thought, you must discriminate. That is, without discrimination, discrimination means differentiating between objects. So when you talk about perception, whether you build it in the robotics or in human thinking, you ask, how do you perceive objects? How do you differentiate them? How do you discriminate them? You have linguists, I suppose, in the commission, and they tell you But with words, you distinguish, you differentiate, you discriminate. In education, we teach them that. Look, number 2 is different from number 5. Number 7 is different from infinity. You can add, multiply, deduct infinity from each other, depending on the kind of mathematics you accept, whether you can quantify and over infinities or not, whether you can operate on infinities or not. That's a mathematical question, but in any case, you're taught differences and discriminations. Now, and when you go to artificial intelligence, you want to build robots, robotic vision and so on. The robots must be, the robotic vision, whether it's a taxi or anything else, must be able to distinguish and differentiate and discriminate the objects. Now, one thing they all know, one thing they teach you is that such discrimination will have to be explicit. That is to say, you cannot differentiate implicitly. Because what would it mean? You cannot discriminate implicitly. You can only discriminate explicitly because you teach people differentiation and discrimination explicitly through actions, words, vision, and so on. So there's absolutely no way on Earth or in the cosmos that you can discriminate implicitly. Now, this is something which you would expect psychologists, educationalists, pedagogical scholars, artificial intelligence people, linguists to know. So when UGC says discrimination implicit or explicit, there's absolutely no way on earth you can make sense of it. If on top of it, you connect punishment to implicit discrimination, what exactly does it mean? It is an empty word. Even if you bring in values, you have to teach values explicitly. It is possible that you have values which are implicit, but your action, your behavior, your discrimination will not be implicit, cannot be implicit. So, when they define discrimination, implicit, explicit, and simply mean adding value judgments or valuational, normative, I don't know what they are, rules. So, I don't know what it is. This is an impossibility. And that's the law. The law. That's where UGC formulates it. So the question is, what exactly, why is it, how is it even possible that vaguely intelligent people could say this? Well, experts are saying it. So the Supreme Court says, please don't be vague, be precise. I don't know whether they mean this implicit, explicit distinction of discrimination, whether it's normative discrimination or discrimination of objects, processes, events in the world, no matter what, we cannot implicitly discriminate. What would it mean to say that implicitly discriminate someone on a scheduled caste? When you say that, you're explicitly saying somebody belongs to the scheduled caste and somebody does not. What would implicit discrimination mean there? It cannot mean anything. But you have to ask a question, and that's what I'll go a bit deeper into now. Why do they use these absurd, meaningless words, connect consequences to them, and make it punishable by law, make it a part of the Indian criminal justice system? It's not a civil issue, it's a criminal issue. So, the first, of course, is this is not only with respect to discrimination, implicit, explicit. There are a whole cluster of concepts, we already talked about it. I'll bring them together into the picture, which is social justice, inclusive society, exclusion studies. Why exclusion studies is because University Grants Commission has a program, I'll come to that very soon. So, inclusive society, exclusion, social justice, discrimination. These are the words which hang together. One is needed for the other because equity is what the UGC rules are talking about, and they're talking about discrimination. They're connected to each other. Now, the first problem we face is a redundancy problem. For example, let's say redundancy meaning when we talk about inclusive society, which is what UGC wants, socially inclusive, and so on, and you look at what they are talking about, then you find there are very clear ideas like expanding the opportunities, reduction of poverty, treating people fairly, treating them with dignity. These are the words that are used. Now the question is very simple. These are all words that you can define because they have been defined. Take for example fairness. There's this famous political philosopher I spoke about, John Rawls. He develops that very precise idea of what fairness is in terms of some basic social goods which must be commonly accessible and so on. But we don't go into fairness. Dignity, you can say, or equality here in the sense of equality before law, equality before the courts, and so on. So these are all words which tell you very precisely what it is and what these things could mean. Now, if you relate these words to social justice, inclusive society, what these words, that is social justice, inclusive society, do not add anything to liberty, equality, dignity, and reduction of poverty, and so on. So the first question is, why use words which are redundant, which do not tell you? They are not defining social justice, they are not defining inclusive society, they want to create that. I'll come to what it means. But these words are not required. Why don't simply say, we need poverty reduction, we need equality before law for all citizens in India. Why do you need to bring in this thing which doesn't seem to be doing any analytical work? Now, we have already seen when we spoke about social justice how it emerged from the Roman Catholic encyclical of the Pope, not just Rerum Novarum, but also other encyclicals which talk about social justice. Now, here is the issue. When this word comes into directive principles, discussions in the preamble, it has been said that this directive principle of social justice was drawn from the Irish Constitution of 1930s. Ireland was a Catholic country. So one would expect people to be influenced by Catholic thinking about upcoming changes in industrial societies. What Rerum Novarum means, on new things, of new things. And the new things were social movements, challenges, revolutionary challenges, in fact, to European society. Now, the idea within the Irish Constitution was that, and if indeed it has played a role, then what is astonishing is that this terminological borrowing into Indian Constitution has not been seriously examined, analyzed in terms of the content by the Indian intellectuals for nearly 80 years, so 100 years if you like, even though Constitution is not 100 years old. So, borrowing these words in the Constitution, discussing about them without knowing what these words mean, what consequences it has, or they have, the Indian intellectuals, jurists and others have not examined it. Today I could not, now we don't find material, any research on what precisely, how precisely Rerum Novarum impacted the Irish Constitution, impacted the directive principles. This is a second problem, namely, you borrow words, borrow notions you don't understand, and there's no examination of it either. So, if it is unexamined assumption, then when you bring it into Constitution, these words are not examined, then these words are completely empty. So, they are simply added on to with anything you feel like, because it's a vacuum, it's empty, you can pour in any content you feel like, because it's empty. So, social justice, empty word. Inclusive society, empty word. So, but then there are words which have very precise meaning, like for example, what I just spoke about, poverty reduction and so on. But because this emptiness of the words, you can apply it to anything. Land reform, social justice. Poverty reduction, social justice. Reservation policy, social justice, inclusive society. Labor legislation, society, inclusive society, and social justice. Poverty alleviation, well, it's also social justice and inclusive society. Minority protection, social justice, inclusive society. Gender equality, social justice. And you see, anything and everything, industrial law, industrial investment, social justice, inclusive society. It is this emptiness that enables. See, these all have specific laws doing specific things, and you can find out whether or not they are doing the specific thing for which they were designed. But this empty word, which can be used to anything and everything, it has one function only. It is. By filling in empty words, it functions in no other way except as some kind of a blessing. It doesn't explain. It blesses you, like the Pope does. God be with you, child. Yeah. So they bless. Whatever they do, they bless it with the slogan, social justice, social inclusion. So, as a result, in the political rhetoric, in administrative reports, you must see the reports that ministries produce, like economic surveys, you'll find that of 25-26, which is recently tabled in the Parliament, you see these words. They don't do any function. They don't discipline your thinking. they don't guide your thinking. They appear very benign. Now, this way of dealing with it, you find even becoming very clear when they speak of inclusive society. When University Grants Commission, the chairman of that, started program called exclusion studies. So what exactly is the problem with exclusion studies? As I said, you see, it was a UGC program recommended by multiple, I suppose, IAS officers, which the chairman of the UGC implemented. It involved creating centers of exclusion studies, which is granted to multiple institutions, of course under some conditions. Not only were they funded, it also had professors. So there are professors of exclusion studies in multiple universities. Some of them were elite institutions like law universities and so on. They're supposed to do exclusion studies. Fine. Now, a problem is this. It requires, if something is excluded, it's excluded from something. That is, it requires a spatial metaphor. Inside and outside, not insider and outsider, inside and outside. So one who is outside is excluded from being inside. So you need inside, outside. It's a boundary. Now, exclusion studies will have to deal with boundaries. Now, what are they excluded from? There are two aspects. First one, they are excluded from, let's say, society. Now, if they are excluded from society, that means programs which want to include them, make the society inclusive, is a problem about crossing boundaries. It's like when you have a visa, you can enter a country. From the outside, you come inside. So if they use this spatial metaphor, you have to say that policies must enable them to cross the boundaries over, as I just said. But if it's an immigration problem, to put it that way, there is something wrong with it. Because the problem, they claim, is not so much who is inside or outside society, but structure treats them one way, treats somebody else a different way. That is, a Dalit, a woman, a scheduled tribe person, if you say that they are outside, then what you have to see is that you make the crossing smooth. That is what inclusion would be about. Now the issue, is it the problem that they are excluded from society, or is it the problem that in the society they are treated differently? Because if it's a question of the structures in society which treats them differently than they should be treated, then you have to reform, change the structures in society. But if you say you have to include them, then you're not talking about, use the spatial metaphor, you are not talking about changing anything within society, you're talking about including new people in society. That's why I spoke of immigration. migration. So are we trying to migrate women into society? Are we trying to migrate social scheduled castes into society? Are we trying to migrate scheduled tribe into society? Now, with these new rules, what are we trying to do? Migrate other backward classes and castes also into society. So exclusion studies, using a spatial metaphor, can only make that. Not only that, it says problem is not in the structures of society, it's a question of migration. I think it would be interesting to find out what Trump administration has to say about migration, but fine. So you see, this way of tackling issues and problems, calling them exclusion studies, having centers what exactly is being studied. Migration of women into India or mistreatment, bad treatment of women in India. What exactly are you studying? So when you make professors, University Grants Commission funds it massively. It doesn't even seem to know what it is studying. What exactly is it funding then? So I already spoke about migration and boundaries. There's another aspect to it which makes it almost incomprehensible. Now, I said earlier on that they must be included into society, but actually, is it not the case that scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, other backward classes, and castes and women are members of Indian society? That is, if a society consists of its members, and these people are members of Indian society, otherwise how can you make programs for them? So when you make the programs, you're assuming they're members of Indian society. I don't merely mean citizens of India according to the constitution and birth and so on, but they're members of Indian society. So if they are in society, how could they be outside society? How could they be excluded from society when they are in the society? The idea of exclusion studies, inclusive society, empty because this is an absurdity, this is a contradiction in terms. So, what does the word do actually? They are excluded in exclusion studies and they need an inclusive society because it's so empty. Can be, as I saw, can be filled in with anything, uses a spatial metaphor very badly, denies that a member of a society is in the society. It has a function, that is, it acts like posturing, political posturing. You can do anything and say, you appear benign. You are not helping any marginalized groups, but everything you do is to help the marginalized groups. So, this phrase vaguely also indicates things like it doesn't want hierarchy, there should be no stigma, there could be no differential treatment. But the point is these words exist, isn't it? If you don't want hierarchy, you say we want to replace hierarchy, for example, with heterarchy. Suppose there is differential treatment, you say, no, there must be equality, and so on. Or egalitarian, if you like. You have stigma, then we would like honor and esteem to be given. You don't need exclusion studies and socially inclusive jargon, which says nothing, because there are words in our languages, we can make programs for that, and non-differentially hierarchical organizational structures we can build if that's what we want. So, not only is it tautological, it plays a role. So then you can act as though you're benign, you're blessing, you're helping people, marginalized people, when you're doing no such thing. This is the fundamental function of it being empty. They have to remain empty, not because it's required, but because you should not think. Because these vague thoughts prevent you from thinking, they don't discipline thinking, as I said. And from this necessarily follows, this is an official discourse. Your bureaucratic documents are full of this. Your political speeches are full of this. And your posturing is full of using of these words. In other words, rounding off, the emptiness and vagueness you see has consequences. They are deliberate. They are not, a confusion. So the question now comes back with the bigger force. Why is it Indian intellectuals have not done anything about it for nearly 100 years now? Second, what exactly was the Supreme Court doing all these decades? They have a function which is to hoodwink people. Posturing. Empty words are required or necessary in India today. So it is the task of intellectuals to analyze this. They have not done it. 100 years. Yeah? They have in fact added to this word salad, if you like. And the Supreme Court, for the first time, I'm very, very glad they have done it. Point out the vagueness, imprecision, and this has a necessary role. These are deliberate constructions. Not to do some conspiracy, no. They play a very fundamental role in the survival of this bureaucracy and all these politicians, all these political parties, whether it's the BJP or the RSS or whatever, or the Congress. Same language, same functions, same necessity. Now, that's why these vague and imprecise terms are used, nonsensical terms are used. Are people who make these laws aware of it? Probably yes, probably no, I don't know. I really don't know. I haven't spoken to anybody, I don't know. They're psychologists, so I really don't know. But if 100 years, this is a continuous reproduction, then it cannot be purely a psychological problem of this or that individual, isn't it? That's what I'm trying to point out. So today, when the Supreme Court says this, please don't say it's a semantic discussion. Please don't say that we are fighting about words. Words have consequences, and you are seeing the consequences of such actions. So it's not just the UGC regulation, but that which feeds it. Your Atrocity Act feeds it, fed by the Indian Constitution. So I would hope a day will come when intellectuals take up these issues, analyze them, and force clarity. Force, because if you don't force clarity, those who make the laws are not thinking. When you make unthinking laws, well, you see where India is, that's where we go. So I hope the intellectuals will do it. And I hope the judiciary begins to live up to its fundamental principle that law must be clear and certain. The way we read it is lex certa. I think it's le certa. Yeah. So this is what UGC regulation, Supreme Court thing has created. There are other things I could say, but I want to round off with a thought. What could you do about it? You see, unlike yesterday, meaning even 5 years ago, to read, to think, to talk, intelligent way, do any research. We needed libraries, we needed institutions, we needed to go to different places. Not that these requirements have disappeared, but they're much, much reduced because the developments of in internet, because especially the developments in artificial intelligence, it is possible for all citizens to access material, resources to begin thinking. So it is citizens who must think about the issues I have spoken about. It's not simply for the lawyers to argue something or the other in Supreme Court. It's not about Section 3C and Sections 3E discussion, even though we have to do that in the Supreme Court. But this is about something far more fundamental, far more important than having some Supreme Court lawyer arguing some case somewhere, or even a High Court lawyer arguing some case somewhere. This is the task for citizens, for people like you and me, to think about what is going on in India, what is going on in the world, what is going on as such, because it is about yourself, more importantly about your children and your grandchildren. If you create laws like University Grants Commission regulations or atrocity acts, you see, especially university, your children need to go to the higher education. So if the institution of higher education, the Apex Institute, talks this way, makes laws this way, what exactly the university and colleges, the vice chancellors and principals are going to do? They're going to reproduce the same thing. Which means what? Teachers will reproduce the same thing. Which will mean what? Your children are taught these things. And what exactly are they taught? They are taught not to think. Come up with slogans, empty words. Because precise words discipline thinking. That guide your thinking, you form your thinking. You remove it, put empty words, fill it up any which way you like, you will stop thinking. And that is exactly what is being taught today. So you're taught not to think. You have to show what you don't know is knowledge. Ignorance becomes knowledge. And that's what UGC is doing. With these regulations. There are people defending it. Oh, I understand a politician defending it because, most politicians are not exactly the most brilliant people. No, intellectually, very few are. How about these experts, psychologists, pedagogists, educationalists, administrators, sitting in the UGC, how could they possibly formulate these laws? They will, they'll continue to do so. I just said why it is necessary they talk this way. So there's only one thing we are left to us, the citizens of India, which is start thinking, start reading, start reflecting, start conversing with each other. Give that to your children and grandchildren. Otherwise, the bill will be due very soon, but we won't be able to pay it. Your children won't be able to pay it. Your grandchildren won't be able to pay it. So you're going to put on their shoulders a bill which cannot be paid. And when you don't pay bills on time, either you pay interest, and if you can't pay interest, there's only one option left: go to jail. So metaphorical jail, perhaps, but that's where your children, grandchildren are going to end up in if you do not do what requires doing. Today the instruments are there, possibilities are there. Begin that. Now, you need, of course, people to provoke you to think, help you think, And that is what I'm trying to do in these videos. I'll continue doing it much more regularly on all kinds of issues. Issues in India, international issues, how India appears abroad, because I'm living abroad more than 50 years. I've been living here in Belgium, Europe. So I will share what my thoughts are about multiple things that are going on in America, in Europe, in India, how they appear to me. I am not a preacher who is going to preach you the truth of God, but I'm going to make you, hopefully, give you sufficient materials to think about, add to what you already have. And you see, this video comes under the title of an attempt that was made by my students, which is called Witness to Our Times. This title is not simply chosen like that, because there are two things. In Christianity and in Judaism, probably also in Islam, there is this idea of bearing witness. Witness to God, witness to Christ, witness to faith. So it's a very powerful idea in these religions. So witness to our times plays on that beautiful idea, because I consider it a beautiful one also. But there is something equally important, which is you don't have to be a Vedantin for that. We had this idea of Sakshi. For example, there are people who say that your Atma, what is Atman? Well, it is the Sakshi. That is witness. Now, it doesn't matter philosophically whether it's correct, not correct, and so on. But being a Sakshi in these traditions, in Indian traditions, is very crucial to being a human being. You are not witnessing a witness to God, you are not a witness to faith, you are not witness to anything. That you are a witness, Sakshi, is very crucial to who you are, if it is Atman. So witness to our times, the witness also captures this notion of witness in India. Our times that is the times we are living in. We are undergoing these things. So, whether we like it or not, we are witnesses also, not just actors and victims. We are also witnesses to what is going on. So, become a witness to our times, each one of you, because but to become a witness, you see, you must be able to see. If you're blind, you cannot be a witness unless it's purely auditive. But today, there is not simply auditive witnessing, it's not possible. So, to be able to see requires not being blind. And it's not to say we're going to see, because you must know what you must see, what is it you see, and how you see. If you tell someone, just open your eyes and go look in imagine somebody comes into a room, open your eyes, yeah, okay, but look, see. The question is, look at what? See what? So it's not simply opening eyes. It's required, yes. So not being blind doesn't mean just open your eyes, you'll see it. No, you must learn to see. You must be taught to see, which is what you tell your child. That what you see is a truck. This, what you see, is an elephant. In other words, you're teaching it to see something as something. In the same way, being a witness to our times, realize these are our times, and there are things occurring in this world, and you must see the way they are occurring. And if you simply use empty words and slogans, fill it any which way you like, you will not see anything. But the price anyway you're going to pay. So my request to you is, please make use of the resources that are accessible more easily, much more easily than 5 years ago. Start thinking and teach that thinking to your children and grandchildren. Because the way India is going, The way UGC is being run, whether you make it 25 councils or 24 committees or 3, you see, same people saying the same thing, doing the same thing, it doesn't matter whether you have 3 or 300 organizations. So whether UGC exists, gets absorbed into something else will not change anything. It may look like a fabulous fundamental change, yeah. I leave it up to you. You will see that it's neither fabulous nor fundamental. So you have to, citizens must look at, must become witness to our times. I thank you.